I'll be your host for the next hour as we explore what digital trust is and how this thing called the DVMS overlay model can help build your digital capabilities. Now, this is following our previous webinar, which introduced the digital trust model, or ISACA's digital trust ecosystem framework. Now, we're going to follow up on how digital trust is having an impact already on how organizations operate. But I do believe it's going to be the consumer, not regulatory means, that is going to really drive the demand for change within our market. So in light of the recent SEC charge to SolarWinds for fraud and internal control measures, SolarWinds, and it's for the first time, the CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, has been singled out. Now, we'll be discussing this. Is this fair? And what are the implications on how organizations need to operate based on some of those things taking place? We do have a few things in store for you today, as you are about to see. APMG, the DVMS Institute, and ISACA have put together a group of industry experts to talk about this. Now, the first half of this event will be a pre-recorded session that we'll launch here in a minute, and that's going to set the basics. Then we'll go into a live panel for a deeper look and provide more content for you from industry experts. Now, one of the things to remember at the end of this session, there will be a checkpoint, a learning checkpoint. So keep an eye on that. So don't drop off as soon as we're finished. We want to make sure that you get that checkpoint in. So let's get started with the video first.
My name is Patrick von Schlag. I am president of Deep Creek Center. We are a consultancy, helps organizations adopt and adapt best practice frameworks. I also serve as director of global delivery for Digital Value Management System Institute, or DVMS, and have been working to help organizations adopt and adapt the digital trust framework. Digital trust builds on every organization's commitment to its own brand. And as organizations become digital organizations, digital trust is an extension of your brand. Are you a trusted provider of your particular products and services? And how can customers, partners, and other stakeholders ensure your commitment to their trust as you manage their information, as you provision and deliver services for them? And how do we set expectations that they can rely on you, that they can count on you as you deliver on your capabilities? So it's something we try to do with all our customers. When we look at existing organizational governance approaches, when we look at existing organizational capabilities, we use what is called an overlay model to look at existing capabilities, assess gaps, identify and prioritize investments and commitments that help organizations build digital capabilities. And as they build digital capabilities, thinking about how to sufficiently protect those capabilities and how to provide appropriate trust and assurance that those capabilities will both deliver on the digital expectations and provide appropriate security and privacy for the stakeholders.
My name is John Brandt, Director of Professional Practices and Innovation at ISACA. In my role, I lead development of thought leadership, which takes on a lot of different shapes. So publications, audit programs. My team influences conference presentations. I also have responsibility for the skills-based exam item development, supporting our hybrid and performance certification exams. So the obvious things are stability and resilience come into play. There's nothing worse than unavailability of service. And decades past, there was an expectation if you wanted to go buy a good or a service from somebody, that when you picked up the phone and called them, they would answer. If you walked to their, if you went to their location, that they were open at the hours that they said they were. That's no different in modern era, right? The difference is now, instead of a fixed set of hours, we've grown into this environment where we almost expect 24/7 coverage, which is unrealistic. But when you go to somebody's website, you want it actually to be able to load. When you reach out to the customer, there's a level of care. Whatever that is, whatever that looks like, needs to be defined and communicated, and you need to stick to that at the end of the day. I think this is a selfish plug, right? If you look at like where generative AI is helping, and to kind of extend that, and we look at different technologies, chatbots and stuff like this, that's all great, but we can't lose sight of is that at the end of the day, there are questions that those things can never answer for, and you want to be able to reach a human. So that kind of mechanism, that level of support, always needs to be factored into the business model. I'd say above and beyond that, though, this concept of digital trustworthiness, though, necessitates a level of transparency. And this is where truly technology and the business, and those core business functions, marketing and sales, this is where they're on a kind of a collision course right now, because a ton of data is collected. There's a lot of behavioral data. We've been tracking people since the beginning of time, and web activity and campaign codes on emails, and to understand behavior and what translates to a sale, what doesn't. The more that we educate the public, I think the more the responsibility is on the company to be able to defend what they do, why they do it, and how they're actually able to meet the consumer as to their personal level of risk. Compliance alone just isn't working. There are great privacy regulations largely fall down. Let's just start there. GDPR was a great start. In a lot of ways is very beneficial. However, we would have never needed that if we only truly collected the bare minimum. And I think this is increasingly, the more that everything is technology enabled, it really is digitally fingerprinting people to not only web behavior, but potentially spending habits and to health. And it really starts getting to this point of where you can really, it's surveillance at the end of the day. And I don't think to this point, we've not seen bad actors put all the pieces together. We know that the capability is there. You look at how nations and their individual intelligence collecting abilities and to be able to protect themselves and allies and all that. But we've not really scratched the surface yet. We see it in like high value targets and spearfishing of key people and businesses and whatnot. But, if you take it up to the next level, that's very concerning. And so the companies that is to the next decade, I think the challenge is to basically think through the eyes of the consumer or what they would want, instead of this blind acceptance of, well, this is just the way it is. I think that mentality is going to just further erode trust. But then this continuous improvement mindset has to be present at the end of the day. There's been some notable players in the market that have been hacked repeatedly. At some point, we're going to see that there's going to be a negative impact there. It won't just be a measurement of sales. It's going to end up being this, a consumers don't trust this entity anymore, and potentially that's going to be a large factor in why they're no longer viable and potentially go out of business. So I think it's important to note that digital trust is this overarching umbrella, encapsulates all of the longstanding work of ISACA practitioners. So whereas digital trust isn't just about security, it's not just about privacy, it's very broad, but all of the practice areas within ISACA and the certified members and our certified and non-certified members, we've got it truly is a global family, if you will, and it takes a village. So those that have been working in audit and assurance, right, governance, security, privacy, all of that stuff is critical to helping. Assure is a tough word. There is no assuring trust, but it is to maximize it at the end of the day. Because again, IT related people are business enablers anymore, right? They truly are. We're advisors in a lot of ways. It's critical parts of it, but ultimately there is some decision maker in an organization or a business unit that is making decisions based on the information they get. So ISACA professionals have a long-standing tie to business. And I think if you look at the type of work we do, professionals are truly, they better understand the business than a lot of folks. I think there's truly a big emphasis there on it's the business-oriented side of things. We'd long pivoted away from just the tech side of things. ISACA has been in existence for well over 50 years, right? It started in that IT audit, and which really kind of it leapt and grew a lot from a regulatory thing, but we've been continuously morphing and penetrating different areas of the business forward looking. So everything from frameworks to the continuous improvement to continue to add, you name it. Largely speaking, we are well positioned to help advance this conversation in any business that seeks to get to some level of digital trustworthiness. So ISACA professionals, let's talk in particular the certified members. ISACA certifications are globally validated based on defined competencies and skills and abilities, right, at the end of the day. Several of our certifications are experience-based, so not only is it attestation of skills and knowledge competencies, but it's also that validation that you've got sufficient time in the industry. Those things, that process by itself is not. It's not to be taken lightly. At the end of the day, it's not just they're not random tests by any stretch. And the fact that, and this speaks to the bigger issue of when you have global input to credentials of bodies of knowledge and task statements for certain roles, that carries through and gives there's a lot of credibility in that. The programs nearly all the major certifications that we have are ISO 17024 certified or accredited. So which basically is focusing on the processes about reliability and fairness, right, towards the candidate, appeals processes and stuff like that. A lot of organizations have seen some kind of decline. ISACA is growing, and that's all, I think, very indicative of the credibility of the certifications and the members that we serve. Digital trust isn't rebranding security. It's not just privacy. It's not just data protection. It's security. Trust is a feeling, right? And at the end of the day, and it kind of wanes. And again, that's the importance for organization to define, to understand what their markers are, because those are not uniform across the board, right? Again, if you're just a service provider and don't provide widgets, then, there's that. You're going to put a lot more stock in the relationship aspect of it. If you provide a product, a widget, what is the warranty period? When it fails, how do you respond to that? If you're subject to certain regulations, what are those? Do you make it easy for your people, for your customers to execute their rights? Like, and we look at like GDPR is a good example of that. The right to be forgotten and those types of things. Speaking of that, though, and it's something that we didn't touch on at all, right? And going back to how can an organization earn trust? How about we start with actually having end user agreements that aren't written for lawyers? The average consumer and isn't reading any of that stuff. It's pages upon pages of fine print. And right now, the consumer doesn't really feel like they have a say. You get to a point where let's get to a period in time where we all, have our mobile devices and we want to go use somebody's app, and I'm able to self-select the types of functionality I want, recognizing that if I don't agree to this, and this, it's probably going to break some features, and I'm not going to have that. But let's have that conversation of really becoming a la carte in that, so a person can really truly make decisions based on their level of comfort with other people's handling of data. Because time has shown, time and time again, our data is not handled well. It hasn't been. And the default mechanism, right, is to, hey, we're going to do credit monitoring. I have so many different kinds of credit monitoring tied to me, as does the average consumer. That it's the default thing. It doesn't show a whole lot of thought at the end of the day. What are we doing beyond that? So I think we're starting to just barely scratch the surface of some very hard conversations here. But I do believe it's going to be the consumer, not regulatory means, that is going to really demand a change within the market.
Hi, my name is Rick Lemieux. I have been in the information technology business for over 40 years. I am the co-founder of the DVMS Institute, where we're focused on helping customers solve their digital risk, resiliency, and data privacy problem. We have been working with clients across the globe to help them leverage their existing investments in best practices and technologies and their people to deliver a specific set of outcomes that have now become the law of the land across the world in terms of the regulators and those who are responsible for ensuring that organizations deliver those specific capabilities. We spend a lot of time having some really great conversations, with our customers so that we can understand where they are today in terms of, not only their cybersecurity, but in terms of their culture and their capabilities as an organization. A lot of organizations today may have the feeling that they want to be as secure as possible, but they might not have all the capabilities to do that. And some of them they might not never ever be able to build themselves, but they can team up with external providers to kind of fill those gaps in delivering, the secure, resilient, digital outcomes that the customers expect. So as we have these conversations, we learn, we kind of learn where they're at, because that's where they need to start. I mean, you can't start anywhere else but where you're at. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't understand where they are right now. So we have to help them, by asking a set of questions, what I call the right questions, right, to get the answer that we're looking for. So sometimes it may take 3 or 4 or 5 questions to get the answer that we're looking for, because, if you look at compliance, if you will, as the world that people are used to. So it's checklists, right? Do you do this? Yes. Do you do that? No. So it's a yes, no type thing, and it's easy to get through. But when you're looking to understand a client's current, capabilities, right, we're looking at it from a risk point of view. So we're asking different questions. And so these questions are not familiar to most people. So in turn, they might not be answering them correctly. So we have to keep working with in developing, the question in order to get the response that we're looking for. Once we understand where they're at, okay, we can then work on a model that helps them get to where they want to go. And that model is built around what I call the 3 C's, okay? It's about convergence. And when I say convergence, it's about convergence of business capabilities and the underpinning systems that support those capabilities, so that instead of having, multiple standalone systems within an organization that are not interconnected, that aren't really aware of their dependencies on each other, we're bringing all those together. Okay, good example of this is just in the best practice arena alone, frameworks, if you will. So we've got a framework for cybersecurity that the NIST organization has built for us. We got a framework around IT service management, and there's a handful of different approaches to how to do, correct IT service management. There's DevOps, there's Agile, and there's all sorts of other frameworks that are integrated into a business to ensure best practices in those particular areas. So convergence allows us to bring them all together into an operating system that deliver a specific set of outcomes. The example I like to use that so people can connect the dots quickly is if you think about cloud computing today, what has cloud done for organizations that didn't exist before? It gives them the ability to dynamically allocate compute, storage, and network based on the needs of the business. It's all dynamic. It all can be done in real time, and the business can change, as the market changes and so on. So that's what this converged model does in the best practice arena. It allows organizations to bring all these things together, interconnect them as a system of systems using an overlay model, and then they're able to adopt and adapt any new framework or standard or model. It doesn't really matter. Whatever they need to deliver the secure, resilient outcomes that their customers expect and that the regulators expect, this new system allows them to do that. So convergence is a really important, component in what organizations need to do. A lot of organizations utilize just governance alone. And governance alone is a very important piece of this, but it's not the only piece. You really need to ensure that all of these different things come together and support, the converged model that will give the organizations the capability they need. The second is the ability to communicate. And you would think with all of the technology and capabilities we have today that we would be communicating correctly, and we're not, right? Because the communication tends to live within a silo, not between silos or business units or business capabilities. So we really need to establish, channels that allow the organization to communicate. Now, in order to do that, you need to understand dependencies. All right. So for instance, I need to know who's dependent upon me to get their job done. And then I need to know, and they need to know how I'm dependent upon them. By establishing that right up front, we understand how the chain is linked together and how the value is delivered and why communications is an important piece of that. The third is collaboration. Because if you look at an organization, especially from an information technology point of view, you have people who manage the desktop computers. You have people who manage the desktop applications. You have people who manage storage, who manage network, who manage cloud. All right. They all have their own little world, and they're all got their touch points or connect points where people can hook things together and deliver a particular service. But if you don't understand that from a risk point of view and a resiliency point of view, it could be, devastating to a company. So understanding those dependencies and then collaborating, working together to continually innovate that capability to ensure that the value that the customer is looking for is continually being delivered is really, really important. So those are the 3 C's that we take our customers on, the journey we take our customers on as we help them get to the point where they can adopt, the DVMS system, the digital value management system, to ensure that they have the capabilities, like cloud, if you will, to adapt their business to the ever-changing threat landscape. And that threat landscape includes internal threats, external threats, and the threat landscape itself. All right. By having those capabilities in place, the bad guys can throw anything at us, but because we're in a position where we can adapt and put in place the capabilities through innovation to protect the organization going forward.
All right, welcome back, everyone. So, and that was great information. Hey, I did notice during the presentation that some folks had their hands up and were raising hands. If you have a question, go out to the Q&A section. We'll try to hit those so you've got that information out there available to you. But I do like a couple things we just heard in the last section here. So if you think about it, you know, some of the things that I picked up out of that was that this information about information and technology in our industry, there's a lot of emerging factors that can affect us from a cybersecurity and privacy perspective. And one of the things that I think I really picked up out of this is, you know, an organization can do many things right. We could do all of these awesome things, but sometimes it only takes one event before our customers or consumers decide, you know what, we're leaving and going somewhere else. It's happened to each one of us. Branding has a little bit to do with a lot of loyalty out there. But another thing I heard was digital trust is an outcome of good security and privacy. And that resonated with me. I remember I had a CEO who slapped his hand on the table. You may have heard this story before. And he said, why are we losing customers when we're one of the most secured companies in the world? Now, that's a pretty big statement to make, right? We're one of the most secured companies in the world, but we were so conformant and we had so many security and privacy practices and control objectives in place that we felt we were secure, but we still had customers leaving us. And that is because they no longer trusted us. And again, having tools can help, but culture is obviously pretty key here. And I do love that last piece. Thank you about Rick talking about the DVMS model, which talks about convergence, communication, and collaboration. I thought that was a great way to really kind of identify some of these key pieces. Some other things here is this overlay of those, what we call those 3 C's. That can help a lot of organizations work better and work smarter, right? So your entire organization, right, that's a digital organization, can put in place risk strategies where you may want to focus on certain areas, okay? All right, so what do we want to do is move on to the live panel next. So I want to bring the panelists in, and let's do that. Let's move on and hear from 4 of our industry experts. You've heard from several of them already. But let's make sure that we've got that information in. Let me make sure that I move some things around so that I can see what kind of questions I want to ask here in just a little bit. All right. So you all saw my intro a few minutes ago, but I'm honored here today. I'm honored to be talking with some good friends and good colleagues in the industry that I've worked with on not just engagements, on frameworks, on many other things out there. So I want to talk to you a little bit about who you're hearing from today. Now, they all gave their introductions a little bit earlier, but I want to give a couple other points here. So first you heard we have Patrick von Schlag. Patrick and I have been colleagues for many, many years. In fact, some of the things Patrick was saying, I was thinking back to a presentation I watched down in Florida. Patrick, I think this was back earlier this year, where he was Yeah, he was talking about kind of the whole idea of digital trust and kind of that convergence with things like service management, putting the right controls in place, and those kinds of things. So I think that was really, really kind of a pretty interesting thing. So hold on just a second. Let me put this, let me change a view so everybody gets, there we go. That might be a little easier so you guys could all see. So Patrick, just so you know, Patrick is pretty humble. So he's a consultant, he's an educator. He's got more than 30 years experience in helping organizations look at best practices, all kinds of best practices from the service management space, governance, information security, project management, agile, organizational change management. If you have a question about frameworks, this is the guy to talk to. Next, we've got Greg Witt. Greg's a personal friend of mine for many years. Greg and I have done a lot of presentations together. He's an author and a speaker who really does a lot with NIST. So anytime I have a question about NIST in terms of cybersecurity framework, those types of things, that's the guy I call right there. Again, another expert with over 30 years of experience out there. Is it 30 years, right, Greg?
40 now. The gray
40
hair.
now, I was going to say, because you're only 30 years old, so I thought that was a little aggressive. So Greg and I have worked a lot together on COBIT, as well as the creation of the kind of the first working group with John as well, with the ISACA Digital Trust Ecosystem framework is out there as well. Then we got Rick Lemieux. Rick's got us all by a couple years. I think he's got over 40 years, so he's got you by at least one more year, Greg. But Rick, co-founder of the DVMS Institute, and he's done a lot around the IT service management side of the house. I remember when I was just getting into the industry, Rick was the guy I'd read his blogs to find out more about what was actually happening in this. So you most likely, if you listened to our first webinar, you heard a lot from both Greg as well as Rick. And then John Brandt, a good colleague of mine, and he has been instrumental in the ISACA community, helping us drive and push not just the digital trust ecosystem framework, but the whole idea of socializing the importance of privacy, security, and many other areas out there. He's been a huge fan of COBIT. Obviously, I'm a COBIT fan as well. But one of the things that he and I were talking about earlier is the Army-Navy game. I don't know if you guys know that's coming up here real soon. And I'm the only person on this panel that actually supporting the Army team in this next side. John is a highly accomplished U.S. Navy veteran. John, thank you so much for your service, sir.
Thanks, Mark. So everybody's got flaws. Just remember that.
I knew that was coming. All right. Hey, we've had a couple of questions come out before we jump in to the whole to kind of jumping into the kind of some of the questions I have for you. We do have a question out here from Turhan. Now, I do want to let you know Turhan is a longtime ISACA member, and Turhan has been instrumental in a lot of things with ISACA, and he asked us a pretty insightful question. And I want to open this up. And Greg Witt, I'm going to start with you on this. But Turhan asks, he says, how does implementation of digital trust differ for enterprises with different business goals, objectives, and values? You want to take a shot at that, and then we'll open it up to the whole panel.
Sure thing, Mark. Thank you. Thank you, Turhan. I think one of the things I was thinking about as I saw the question, really, the way you approach digital trust might be very similar for a small business. You might be having just a simple conversation, even around a work table, where you're talking about how can we improve and achieve digital trust. A larger organization may have more formal processes where they're assigning personnel to actually pursue different trust factors and activities. But either way, I think it gives, especially for a smaller organization that may not have all of that process, it reminds that organization that you need to kind of roll up your sleeves and think about, what is it that would enhance trust? What might jeopardize trust? I think one of the things I love about the digital trust model is that there's lots of opportunities to pursue the positive side of it. So many times on the risk side, we're saying, what could go wrong? So much of digital trust is how could we make it better? How can we be looking over the horizon and asking questions about how to improve that trust? So I think, and we heard We heard all three of the speakers, really driving that point home. So I thought that was great.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Patrick, you've worked with a lot of organizations in your career. I'm sure you've got a follow-up for this one.
I do. So one of the things that I hope people consider is that digital trust, again, is an outcome that gets experienced by your customers based on their journeys with you, their interactions with you. So it kind of stands to reason that a good digital trust journey for any organization begins with its customers, right? Who are your customers? What exactly are they looking for from you? Why do customers choose you for your particular product or service? What are the things that they feel? And you can run various types of focus groups or just engage certain critical customers and other suppliers and partners to ask them the question around, what do we do as an organization to help build trust? How do we exhibit transparency? How do we ask for information and inputs and feedback so that we create an environment where you have skin in the game, where you perceive that you are part of a shared trust journey with your own customers and stakeholders?
You got it. Hey, John, I'm going to jump to you next on that and finish up with Rick. So any perspective on that? Because I know that you were really part of looking a lot at the whole idea of ISACA's digital trust ecosystem framework. Was there a single type of organization you were thinking of or something different?
No, and that's the beauty of it, right? At the end of the day, I think is, through development, we tried to be very aware of the different sizes of businesses that are out there. And I think what Greg and Patrick just touched on are absolute key points of that. But I think it's important too, right? When we talk about the digital trust model, it's an umbrella. We've been doing aspects of this, and I love it in the sense that done correctly, you're going to knock down silos. You're going to have to go talk across the organization. What are you trying to accomplish? And then when you actually begin to execute on that, right, and look at that journey, what are the things we're already doing? Because this isn't meant to replace everything, all the other work that's already being done. It's to encapsulate it and to give you a more holistic view.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And Rick, you were talking a little bit earlier, kind of introducing us to this overlay kind of idea. And again, going back to the question, hey, is this really focusing on one or many types of organizations? Tell us about the overlay and kind of how this overlay for the digital trust ecosystem framework and some key points on how it may really address a lot of different types and sizes of organizations.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point. I mean, the overlay itself is designed to accommodate any size business, regardless of size, scale, or complexity. So that's the beauty of it. It doesn't matter whether you're a 5-person company or a 5,000-person company. The overlay model can sit within your infrastructure to enable the capabilities that we talked about, in the pre-record. I think the most interesting thing is, and this may be a Rickism, so I apologize up front, but I think a lot of the solutions that have been developed, including cybersecurity, risk management, resiliency management, data privacy, it's all been from looking from the company to the customer versus looking from the customer to the company. Okay, I think Patrick covered this earlier. So we need to engage the customer in the conversation. So let the customer tell us what they feel comfortable with in terms of the value delivered and the protection of their personal data and all the other things that we talked about in the pre-record. And I think once you understand what the customer views as a trusted relationship and a valuable relationship with the supplier, then the supplier can follow those 3 C's I mentioned in my piece in terms of setting up the infrastructure to support that, to deliver the capabilities that the customer is expecting.
Yeah, you got it. That makes a lot of sense, and thanks for that, everybody. As I'm looking at the additional questions, we have some questions about, do we get a certificate? I'll give you that information towards the end on how you can do CPE. But there's a general comment that I actually kind of like. It says it would be nice if app developers and software providers are required to provide a summary or bullet points of information they collect and what they plan to do for the consumers in addition to having pages and pages to review. I think it's more of it sounds like more of a comment than a question out there, but it makes a lot of sense to me. So here's what I'd like to do. And folks, if you have any additional questions, please put them out in Q&A. But I've got a few things that I'd like to ask the panelists, specifically in light of a few things that are taking place today. So I'd like to open another poll here. There's a poll about the CISO, Chief Information Security Officer. If you haven't read anything in the news recently, if you've paid attention, that you probably understand there's some big things going on right now around singling out the CISO, and we may have some heated observations on this. And let's go ahead and take a look here. It looks so. The question is, do you think the CISO should be responsible for the security of an organization? It seems pretty basic, but there's a lot of nuances in here. Looks like we're going to end the poll. Is there a way that I can show everybody what the poll results look like? If APMG, if you can help me share the results. There we go. It says about a quarter of you, just under that, say primarily yes, alongside with the board, the majority. That's where my head is right now. And a very small percentage say absolutely not or no. I like this. This is going to go to my next question here. So let me move this out of the way. So here's what's happening, right? Like I said, if you take a look at the news, right, now all of a sudden you have a CISO being called out specifically. But here's my question, kind of based on that, is now we mentioned earlier that digital trust is an organizational approach. Get it. Now, in light of that SolarWinds news, and we'll probably talk about that a little bit more here coming up, what do you think of the SEC singling out the CISO? Why would they do this? What are the motivations for singling out a single individual? Right? Would this really benefit us in security? Here's my perspective first. Right? I think that personally, I think a lot of decisions are made in an organization of these types by not just the CISO. I think there's a lot of different roles, including kind of oversight from the board. So I don't know all the details. I don't know if it's just the CISO that made those specific decisions, but I think there's a lot of people, because now we're saying on one side of the coin, we're saying security protection is everybody's job. Unless something goes wrong, then we're going to blame the CISO. Right. That's kind of what I pulled out of this. So I understand WISE to set a precedent on, we need to have somebody who's accountable for this, but I'm not sure I agree with this. I'm going to open it up. Anybody want to start with your opinions on whether or not the CISO is singularly responsible for this, as we're seeing right now with the SEC and SolarWinds? Anybody want to start with this one?
Sure.
John, you're shaking your head.
So given the current landscape of the CISO, inconsistencies in placement, authorities, you can't hold that person singularly responsible, right?
Okay.
And I think this is a very interesting, and I think could be a positive outcome at the end of the day, because it's going to force some really hard conversations regarding this, of the frustrations of that chief security executive and placement, and right, what voice they have. I think the other side of this, though, is that just about every IT practitioner that's out there, IT related, right, cyber related practitioner, has signed on to some code of ethics. And I think that we're at a crossroads here too. Because at what point do you remain loyal to those that are signing your paycheck when they're putting you in a position or doctoring things? I think what's key in that SEC thing, and I'll just, you take it to another one of our panelists, is that a lot of these are they're alleged, right? They're allegations right now. And at the end of the day, all of that, as it continues to play out, but it has surely put the CISO in a precarious position. And the circles that I'm following, you're exactly right. This is extremely heated right now.
Yeah. Hey, Patrick, looks like you're shaking your head. I'm sure you got to follow up on this one. And then I'll go to Greg and then Rick.
I definitely do. So one of the things that we will find out as this case commences is why they chose to hold this individual criminally liable? Was there a lack of transparency with the board about the relative risks? Was there a lack of execution on the board's directions, or a lack of transparency with other critical stakeholders, both inside and outside the organization, about their relative risks? Right. So they are certainly not uniquely responsible for security, such as we say, because ultimately the board of directors is always on the hook for organizational risk, including security risk. Right. Having said all that, right, if they aren't being provided appropriate vehicles for inputs, if the CISO is not directly executing on the mission that's being given to them by the board and other senior leadership, then they might be held accountable for their performance.
Yeah. Hey, Greg, I'm going to jump in and see if you got a follow-up to that. And then Rick, I want to get your perspective.
Yeah, I'll make it quick, but I'm not sure I completely agree. I think I saw in a recent article, someone said it was compared it to scapegoating. I think I agree with what was said. If the CISO was negligent, of course they need to be held accountable. And I like the idea of making a CISO the one who is accountable for many of these outcomes. But that also means that they've got to be able to delegate some of that responsibility back to the board. In the case of a very large recent breach, the CISO got canned and the CEO got promoted. And I think that may point to some challenges where, if we're going to hold somebody accountable, it ought to go across the board rather than have somebody get the blame and everyone else gets the bonus.
Yeah, I agree. That kind of goes back to my thinking on that I'm not sure if we're looking for that, like you said, that scapegoat, right? Because I think, like we said, on one hand, we're saying cybersecurity is everyone's job. Oh, by the way, if something goes wrong, CISO, you're in trouble. Right. Mm-hmm. So we don't know where these decisions were made in this organization, but I think it's very careful. We have to be very careful about that. So Rick, I want to move on to you and kind of do any follow-ups on this, because I know you've done a lot of research, especially from the cybersecurity, for the digital trust, privacy, roles and responsibilities. I'm sure you've got an opinion on this one.
Absolutely. I'll cover it from two different angles. Let me talk about it from the SEC angle first. These are my thoughts. Okay. Mm-hmm. It's been very clear as they were, updating the rules that, they were definitely looking to hold organizations responsible for their security, their cybersecurity, mm-hmm. the management of risk, resiliency, and so on. Mm-hmm. Originally they talked about putting someone on the board who had cyber skills who could contribute that to the overall business strategy and so on. And then they changed that at the end. So they basically, didn't really provide, or at least deliver on that capability, which I never really agreed with from the beginning anyway. So I don't think it was such a bad thing.
Yeah.
However, the whole goal of the SEC is to, force organizations to report what's happening to their business in terms of cybersecurity attacks and successful breaches. And so I think the whole putting the CISO up on the at the top of the pyramid is sending a message to all CISOs saying it's your job, you're being paid to help an organization figure out its cybersecurity strategy, making sure it's implemented, making sure it's delivering the outcomes that the business expects. However, you have no authority to approve any of that. So that is the responsibility of the executive team and board. So if you're presenting to them things that they need to do that they're not agreeing to or agreeing to fund, then you as an individual within that organization with responsibilities you have, you need to report that to the SEC or whatever governing body is managing that. So I think they're trying to change the focus of the CISO from being loyal to the company in terms of being loyal to the user or to the government or whatever you want to say in that spot there. But I think in terms of the flip side is how can you hold someone accountable for everything? And by the way, if you look at the SEC, suit, they're not only holding him responsible for internal security controls and whatever else, they're holding him responsible for product controls, product capabilities. Right. He has nothing to do with the product. He's not even sitting on a team is involved in the development of the product. So how can you hold him or her accountable for that? It doesn't make any sense. But once again, I think the SEC is trying to, create, the poster child for CISOs, and this is how you need to be thinking going forward if you want to continue to operate in the world as a CISO.
You got it. You got it. So I'm going to move on. We did a question. We had a question earlier, John. I'm going to hit you on this because it says, "Hey, how do you perceive zero trust and digital trust enable each other?" Because they're separate but kind of equal things. John, zero trust and digital trust, do they have a relationship?
So I would say zero trust absolutely is going to support and enable digital trust, but I think this is where we still have there's some confusion across the market, right? People define digital trust differently, and I think that's an important acknowledgement, right? ISACA has defined it as the confidence and the integrity of the relationship, interactions, transactions among providers and consumers within an associated digital ecosystem. Nowhere in that statement does that say just security. And so with that said, zero trust is I'm a huge fan. I believe that, that is the way to actually execute on security, but security is just one aspect to supporting digital trustworthiness.
You got it. So, I think it makes a lot of sense. Anybody have any follow-up on that? Because we're getting close. If you have a quick answer to that, jump in. If not, I'll move forward. We got a question from Keith. Keith Sutherland, one of my good friends. Keith, thank you for your question. Keith says, "Hey, I thoroughly enjoy hearing that the panel describes trust as a perception." I really, really like that. And then speaks to just enough information as a factor of that. Though the IT and the CISO are certainly involved, who is best to lead this in an organization? How do we better create the stewardship across the organization? Patrick, I'm going to start with you because you've seen 3 times the number of organizations that any of us have. How do we do that?
You obviously have to start at the top. It needs to be a fundamental part of an organization's strategic objectives to build trust in their ecosystems, right? And so this begs questions about every digital capability, every organizational communication. Right. So it encompasses digital trust. It also encompasses other ways you build relationships, you build transparency with your stakeholders, whether you're talking about customers and users, whether you're talking about various suppliers and partners. Right. Eventually, everybody has a role to play. Right. In being able to help identify and align how we plan things, how we do digital design, how we manage organizational change and stakeholder communications, and a whole bunch of other things, right? But it ultimately comes back to prioritizing this. Do we think it's a disproportionately important thing to build trust with our stakeholders, and that then should be used as a prism to look through all the other work that we do, both at the governance level and how we manage and execute?
No, that makes a lot of sense. Rick, you're next on this one.
Yeah, I think it really involves creating, a risk team. I mean, let's face it, cybersecurity risk management is a team sport. It certainly involves everyone in an organization, but there have to be a team in place, responsible for it. And that team needs to include someone with authority, maybe like a COO, who can actually, take the feedback from the team and then make decisions on what investments the organization is going to make and carry that message back to the board for final approval. I think it also needs to include representation from the internal auditing group. It needs to have representation, obviously, from the risk team, from project and program management teams, from the subject matter experts. I mean, it really involves, a whole group of people who, touch every aspect of the digital enterprise and can become, significant contributors to the organizational strategy and capabilities. And I think if you tie that all together, it kind of goes back to my 3 C's earlier. It kind of fits perfectly.
It does. It does go into that. Hey, Greg, we're getting kind of short on time, but I'm sure you've got a comment on this one. Go for it.
I think so. Actually, I was thinking about the 3 C's as well. One of the things that I've seen more and more is convergence. In fact, some of the questions we've been looking at kind of speak to that convergence. The lines between partners and internal and external and customers and our own teams, it's all one big mush now, including the cloud. So we've got to be thinking about those 3 C's.
Yep, I agree. And it was funny as we got a comment. It's actually in the Q&A from Robert. It says, "Call me a pessimist. I think there are some other undisclosed breaches or SEC investigations where the subject companies are asking, well, what about SolarWinds?" So I think that's pretty interesting. So we're starting to see a legal precedent come out of this whole thing. I want to move on here real quick because I know we only have a few more minutes. And John, you had mentioned that trust is a feeling. I really like that. Right, because trust to be with an organization means something different than somebody else. There's a reason why I'm still doing business with a company who's had a breach where you may have said, "I am out of here," right? So that feeling. So I think that I want to kind of hit one of those things that you had mentioned, and kind of open it up to everybody, saying, obviously we have to have this culture, but how can an organization connect with our customers to understand what that trust as a feeling means? I know there's a ballad or a song out there somewhere that talks about this, but I'm looking for your specific answers. Anyone want to start with this? How do you do that? Patrick, we'll start with you.
So there's a wonderful analog that we can look at from many, many years ago in the non-digital universe. I think back to the 1980s and the Tylenol situation, right, where they had an issue and they had to do an enormous recall. And this created significant risk that people would not trust acetaminophen as a solution or that particular company. But they handled it with such transparency and such ownership, and they communicated directly to all of their constituents.
And they're still successful.
This is what has happened. This is what is done. This is what we are doing. We are committed to making things right. And then, of course, instead of just saying that, they then spent the next 5 years reiterating that message over and over and over again. And they've built the trust and the capability back, and they maintained their position.
That's a great example. I know everybody else would love to jump on this, folks. We're getting short on time. What I want to do is a roundtable. I want to get your number one piece of advice when we're looking at using these frameworks, using these overlays, the 3 C's, to digital trust. I'm going to start with Rick. You're first. Your top tip. I'll move to Patrick, then John, then Greg. Rick, up to you. What's your number one piece of advice from today's content?
Well, I think it's the first C, convergence.
There you go.
A
lot of frameworks.
We can bring it all together, and then we can establish the pathway, for communication and collaboration.
Agreed. We had a comment out there about frameworks. They may be able to hook up with you and talk a little bit more. You are actually, Patrick, about different frameworks as well out there. Thank you, Rick. Patrick, on to you. Your top tip.
Don't forklift anything. You start with what you already have, right? You look at what you currently have in place. You use something like an overlay model to do your gap analysis, and then set and prioritize things that are going to be distinctive for every organization.
You got it. Couldn't have said it better. John, on to you. Your top tip.
Do the right thing. Ultimately, listen, across the globe right now, we have challenges in integrity and personal accountability. We must be better holistically.
I totally agree. Greg Witt, you're going to finish this up for us. Top tip.
The soft domains in between what we've all become used to from more of a compliance level. But when we look at things like culture, human factors, emergence, those are the things that make digital trust so much more valuable rather than just people, process, technology.
You got it. Ladies and gentlemen, I know we have about a minute left. I've got a couple closing comments I'd like to make. Thank you very much to all the panelists. You guys were awesome. I appreciate everybody sticking around. I know we couldn't get to every single question, but I think some of the questions were more comments and more additions to this. But I hope everybody was able to get value information in this. Again, APMG, DVMS, ISACA, thank you for all the work, not only into this session, but all the work that you do for our industry. And again, to my good colleagues here for answering a couple of really tough and potentially sensitive questions out there. Now, ISACA members, you can claim 1 free CPE for this. All you do is upload a screenshot of your Zoom registration. There won't be a certificate that comes out. It's a screenshot of your Zoom certification or your Zoom registration. You can upload that into the ISACA site so that you can get 1 CP for this. You will get an email. If you register for this webinar, you'll get an email with a link to the recording. Usually that recording is done within the next couple of days, and that'll be out on YouTube as well as out on the APMG site. Look forward to this. As soon as we close this up, you'll get a checkpoint as soon as this is finished up to make sure that you can answer a couple of the pretty easy questions that hopefully that we've been able to cover today. Everybody, thank you very much. Keep an eye out. More of these are coming up. I hope you learned something from it. Thank you again to the panelists. Thank you to all the kind participants for your questions and your comments. Everybody have a great week. Look forward to seeing you in the next webinar. Thanks all.